Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Ahdaf Soueif, a very well-known writer from Egypt, and we'll be discussing what is happening in Egypt today. Ahdaf, you had been here a couple of years back, but at that time we were still looking at the Arab Spring, various things that had happened after that. Today we have a very different scenario. We have a military rule back in Egypt again. We have difficulties with, shall we say, democratic aspirations of the people. Students' union having been, some sense, dissolved. The lawyers who are fighting the cases of the disappeared, some of them are also being put in prison. So how do you rate it before the Arab Spring or what happened in Tahrir Square and today? Would you say you've gone back to the same position, or is there some change that you see and that is a consequence of what has happened during the Tahrir Square?
Okay, well, thank you, and I'm very glad to be back here. I think it can look as if we're back in the same place, but I think that things have changed. And you could say that we're moving not in a circle, but in a spiral. So in Egypt, the revolution of January 2011, it actually did something. It actually changed the psychology of the people. And I think there's no way that you can go back to the pre-January 2011 state of things. In terms of the ruling regime, of course, what we have is the Mubarak regime back with a vengeance, with sort of bells and tiaras and so on. An overt dictatorship and a police state. Now, of course, it was a police state under Mubarak, but now everything is much more out in the open. So we were just talking about the numbers of police that there are on the street. They are large numbers, and they also they want to be seen, So there are these brand new shiny cars with police written on them, and then inside them they stack the men, and sometimes they're wearing the balaclavas and the masks, and so they're making a very conscious act of presence on the streets. Of course, we have disappearances, which were very rare in Mubarak's time. But I think maybe the most important difference in terms of the regime is that throughout Mubarak's time, let's say from 2000 on, when there was really strong opposition and opposition movements started appearing on the streets and so on, you could rely on the two institutions that are there to act as check and balance on the government to do a job. So the judiciary, you could more or less rely that if you went to court, you would get a fair trial. And the media, that there would be room in the media for a different voice, not in the main channel state media, but somewhere. Now, both these institutions have gone over to the regime and are really behaving as arms of the regime. Therefore, there is no notion anymore of justice in the courts or of an impartial judiciary. And the media is completely singing the tune of the regime, apart from the odd website like Meda Masr.
So the repression has in some sense been more open, what you were saying, but the people's confidence and the belief that they may be able to change like they did before, that is the new thing that you see in Egypt today as a consequence of 2011?
Well, I think that the people know that they can get rid of the head of a regime. Getting rid of the regime itself is a much more difficult proposition. I think people have, on the whole, lost their fear because they've been in confrontations, and so many people have died, and so many people have been badly injured, and we have so many people in prison. So that sort of the sense of normality that you have under normal circumstances that makes you afraid of state violence is no longer there. We don't have normality. But all this doesn't mean that the people believe that they can get up and change the regime, because the regime itself has proved very resilient and very flexible in how it presents itself. And also because for people it's like, so what's the alternative? You know, in January 2011, a key factor was that in Tunisia, people had gone out on the streets and Ben Ali had run away. And so there was, if they can do it, we can do it. So there needs to be an element of hope, and there needs to be one clear target, one clear achievable target. Now, the target can no longer be remove the head of state.
You know, one thing, of course, is that the nascent electoral process, I will not call it democracy, but the nascent electoral process also led to an advantage to the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood, who were the most organized of the political forces. Do you think there is a belief now, after what we saw the Muslim Brotherhood, its unpopularity in terms of what they did, trying to ram a constitution down the throats of other people? Do you think there is a belief now that we need to look at the political processes and rebuild them again in a way that allows an expression of different kinds of politics on the ground, which is the only way you can think of changing the, what you said, not just the head, the titular head, but the regime itself?
I think this was very much one of the topics, a central topic that was very much under discussion in Egypt in 2011, which is, what is the meaning of democracy? And if democracy really means that the people who are most affected by a decision get to be part of making that decision, and this is at every level, then where is it that we see democracy happening? And there's a sense that democracy has become a process, really empty of real meaning. Now, on the Muslim Brotherhood issue, they did in fact win parliament, and that was it was free and fair elections, and everybody knew that they were the ones who were most organized, and they had people on the ground, and they won parliament. So if they had fulfilled their promise to carry on the road of revolution towards the aims of the revolution, i.e. social justice and human rights and so on, and if they had agreed to work with people outside the Brotherhood, then we would not be in this position now. But what happened, there was a banner that was raised when people demanded that Mohammed Morsi step down. But let's just remember that the demand of the people on June 30th, 2013, was that early presidential elections should be held. Not that he should be deposed by a military movement, but that early presidential elections should be held. And of course, the Brotherhood supporters would say, the ballot box brought us in. And the response to that, which was in banners everywhere, was, our boxes cancel out your boxes. Our boxes being the boxes, the coffins, in which the shuhada, the young people who were killed by the Brotherhood, were buried. So the fact that you killed our people on the streets cancels your ballot box, which is an argument. But I think you're completely right that the issue is, how do you get a situation where people do determine what's best for them? And I see this question rising everywhere. Here in Lahore, I was there 2-3 weeks ago. In London, in the United, that is the big question.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is a question of what electoral democracy, as it were, to real democracy would mean, and you can evacuate the content of democracy with just a formal part of elections. But coming back to what you said about Morsi, you're absolutely right that the demand was he stepped down, which is a legitimate demand of any civil movement, that you can raise such a political demand. It's only when it gets into endorsing the military takeover and the military deposing of Morsi that actually it opened the back doors to what has happened now. And I would say that it was also the immaturity perhaps of the political processes which were really post 2011, which was very nascent, that led both the Muslim Brotherhood doing what it did and opening the gates to military dictatorship in Egypt again.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, you're completely right that there is a political immaturity. I mean, after all, we're talking about a situation in which for 60 years the state has made it its business to absent people from politics. And so it's not surprising that, that there is political immaturity.
And it takes time to build them up. Last question, Tunisia, that you mentioned about Tunisia. Tunisia seems to have been a more mature response to the Tunisian revolution than what we saw in Egypt, both from the other side, which is again the Muslim Brotherhood. The Ennahda is really another variant of the same. And also it seems that there's a deeper political processes in Tunisia, part of it being the labor movement and so on, which made the difference between Tunisia and Egypt. Would you think that that is true?
Yeah, I also think that Tunis is much smaller than Egypt, and the level of education there is much higher, and also it's not in the crosshairs of so many interests, so many world interests as Egypt is, and I think that they were very lucky in having Mr. Ghannouchi, who was, you know, able to negotiate through a process which seems to be working the best of all the Arab revolution scenarios so far.
You know, how would you see Egypt playing out in the future? I know crystal ball gazing is a difficult exercise, but how do you see it play out? Do you think we are going to see the slow maturing of political processes again, and this time, if there is a movement, a more mature response to the events?
Well, I think that revolutions take a long time. So it would be, I mean, yes, of course, there was tremendous hope and tremendous euphoria. But we need to remember that the 25th of January 2011 was not a planned revolution. It was a spontaneous eruption of people on the streets. And it was miraculous. It put out so much energy and goodwill and brilliant ideas, and everybody like making the best of themselves and working, and I think we need to not ever deny that. But I think also that it is one event in what is going to be a series of events. I mean, basically, it itself was the outcome of 10 years of protest and opposition to Mubarak and talking about alternative ways of running the country and so on. So it was a great sort of climactic event, and now we're in a different moment. But the revolution continues because there's no choice but for it to continue. Certainly under the present regime, there is not going to be a maturing of political engagement or, you know, being able to articulate a vision for how you want things. That's not going to happen under the present regime because their human rights behavior is so terrible. We have over 40,000 people in prison.
It's a completely authoritarian regime.
It's completely authoritarian and it's brutal. It doesn't permit, it really doesn't permit any action whatsoever.
40,000 people?
We have more than 40,000 people in prison. We have every month about 100 people disappear. Extrajudicial murders. It's a very violent regime. So nothing can flourish or happen within this. So something needs to happen to change the spirit in which the country is living into one that is more conducive to thought.
This is all the time we have for Newsclick today. Keep watching Newsclick.